This is the Friday, July 31st, 2020 edition of the Dark Illumination Report Podcast Extra. This is the first edition of the entertainment-based episode, which I'm referring to as Casual Fridays, where we talk about anything that's related to Satanism but is not directly related to the religion, meaning we're going to be talking about entertainment, books, movies, films, anything that Diabolists might be interested in. If that's something that interests you, stay tuned.
This is a Dark Illumination Report Extra with RJ Womack.
Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Dark Illumination Report podcast. I'm your host, RJ Womack, aka Brother Nero, and this is the podcast where we promote the religious worship of Satan and demons as a serious faith and way of life, and we try to pass that knowledge on to new and young Diabolists. Well, this is the first edition of our entertainment episode, and on this episode and on every Friday episode after this, we're going to try to talk about things that are more casual, and I'm referring to it as Casual Friday. And the reason I'm doing that is because, as I've always said to you guys, this religion is about balance. Satan expects us to do what we've committed to do for him, but he also doesn't seem to appreciate martyrs who are only about serving the kingdom, who have no desire to have a balanced life. And the reason I say that is because one of the reasons I believe Satan made the sacrifices he made, one of the reasons I believe he advocated for mankind and gave us free will and self-awareness and gave us knowledge of science and technology, which I believe Satan is responsible for, is because he wanted us to enjoy our life. He wanted us to have the best life possible. And I believe that the best way to show him how much we appreciate the gifts that he's given us and the gifts that the other demonic gods have given us is to enjoy our life, to take time out to enjoy the daily things like family and just pleasurable things. So that's what this episode is about. It's about maintaining that balance and practicing what we preach by making sure that the podcast reflects that idea that we have balance and we give equal attention to every aspect of our life. And that's the way to respect Satan and the demons and appreciate what they've done for us and the gifts that they've given us. So anyway, with that said, the first thing I want to talk about in this episode is I want to give you a little bit of a book update to let you know what's going on with my progress on my book. Now, I said I was going to try to get the book out by the end of the year. It looks like I'm going to try to shoot for a release date of January 15th for the newest book. And the reason I'm doing that is because I decided that I'm going to take off 2 weeks for winter solstice or Saturnalia or Yule, because that's what ancient pagans did. They tended to take 14 or 15 days off for the winter solstice holiday, or at least they celebrated it for 15 days. Realistically, in ancient pagan times, they had to grow crops, they had to do things, they had to work, they had to feed the animals. So they really didn't take off, but they observed the holiday both in Norse culture and in Roman and Greek culture. They took time off for the winter solstice, or at least I should say in Roman culture, they took off 2 weeks for Saturnalia. I don't really know if that's true for the Greeks, but they usually copied whatever the Romans copied whatever the Greeks did. So I shouldn't say that. I'm implying that the Greeks did something they may not have done. So anyway, but the Romans took off 2 weeks for Saturnalia, roughly, and they observed it for 2 weeks, and so did the Norse pagans and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm rambling, but the idea is because of that 2 week holiday, I'm going to delay the release of the book till January 15th or so, or the end of January, because I'm going to be trying to hire a professional editor this time around, and they're not going to be working during the Christmas holidays, of course. So it's going to have to be delayed a bit. And I do want to make it clear that this date may change and may be pushed back, but I'm trying to shoot for January 15th or January 30th, somewhere around there. I can never tell whether I'm going to finish the manuscript or not, but I'm starting to work on it really hard and in earnest. So I'm hoping to have it available by that time. I'm really going to try really hard, because another thing is when you start working with professional editors and cover designers, you really have to hit your deadlines. And I really want to, you have to book your editors like 3 months in advance sometimes. So once you book your editor, your manuscript has to be ready. That's just kind of the way it works. But anyway, I just wanted to give you all a little bit of update on that. Now, the next thing I want to move into is I want to talk a little bit about a podcast that I've got coming up with my friend Mo. I'm going to be co-hosting a podcast called Nero and the Pig. And I'm Nero, and obviously Mo is the pig. And it's going to be an entertainment-based show. It's going to be 30 minutes a week, and we're going to talk about entertainment and stuff. And that's kind of what this show is kind of a prelude to. And I'll be airing the first episode of that podcast on this podcast next Friday. And me and Mo will be doing a 30-minute podcast once a week on all things entertainment from a diabolist perspective. Now, for those of you who don't know Mo, he is a friend of mine from England that I wrangled into doing this entertainment podcast with me. And this entertainment podcast, the first few episodes are just demo episodes. They don't really have a formal intro or they're not really going to be heavily produced or structured. They're more to see if it's something that you guys would be interested in. And if you're interested in it, we'll continue to do it. If you seem to like it, if you appreciate what we're doing on that show, we'll continue to do it. And if that works out, then we're going to make that one of the shows that we're going to launch on a podcast network for the ministry. That's one of the things that I've always wanted to do. It's one of the things that I plan to do. And I'm hoping to get other people to host shows on the podcast network for the ministry at some point as well. So I'm always looking for people that are going to be practicing diabolists, maybe that appreciate the tradition and really want to really embrace the tradition as their way of life and their approach to the diabolistic faith. And if they do, then I'd like to get them to host some podcasts on the podcast network at some point in the future. That's another project. Now, I also want to let you know kind of what I'm reading as far as casual reading, because I know most diabolists are book fanatics and book fans, and horror movie fans and stuff. So I want to let you know what's going on with that. So what I'm reading as far as fiction goes, I'm reading The Blood of Elves, the first book in the Witcher series, and I'm reading Cursed, which is the book that the Netflix series Cursed is based on, and the actress that does the main part in the book, in the show, is also reading the audiobook as well. And I'm in the process of listening to the audiobook right now. And it's pretty, it's not as interesting as the show so far, but the show is well worth watching. And for those of you who don't know, the actor that plays Floki plays Merlin in the show Cursed. And Cursed is basically, it's like a prequel telling the story of the Lady in the Lake before she was the Lady in the Lake in the Arthurian legend. So that makes it interesting. And I think it's going to be a good show, and it's very popular on Netflix. So I think it's going to get renewed for a new season. The other thing that I'm doing as far as my my personal development reading, I'm currently reading Tools for Titans by Tim Ferriss, which is really interesting. What he did was he interviewed 100 famous people, athletes, and entrepreneurs, and he asked them what do they do to be successful, and he gives pretty good in-depth answers, and it's pretty interesting because they go over health, they go over productivity, they go over a lot of things. And the interesting thing, just to show you that Uncle Nero's advice is good, he said that almost every one of them, or at least 90% of them, actually have a morning meditation routine or a spiritual routine that they do. And these are all multimillionaires, by the way, at least multimillionaires. And they all, pretty much 90% of them, have a regular spiritual routine of meditation and other practices and things that they do. So if you want to see how successful people do things, they all have to-do lists. They all have a morning meditation routine and a spiritual routine before they do anything else in the day. And they're all very, very productive, and they all have productivity structures to their life. They don't just randomly go through life and do stuff. They plan out their life. But there are actresses and actors that are very, very deliberate in everything they do. And that's how they got to be where they're at. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was another one. He followed certain routines, and he was fanatical about it. And so I don't feel bad about myself, that I'm kind of obsessive about certain things. And also, by the way, another film that you might be interested in if you're a writer is the film called Mary Shelley, which was put out by the Independent Film Channel, but it's available on Hulu. It's a good movie. It's an interesting movie, but it definitely only scratches the surface of Mary Shelley's life. And Mary Shelley was kind of interesting because her mother was a radical feminist. Her father was an anarchist. They were both writers, and she lived a very unconventional life, and she lived a very hard life. And she never was able to sell enough of Frankenstein to make a living off of her writing. That's kind of amazing to find out because you don't really realize that. You think Frankenstein is so popular, is so ubiquitous that, of course, it should have made her tons of money, but it didn't. She never made a living off of Frankenstein. I don't even know if she made a living off of her other stories and other nonfiction that she wrote. But her life was very tragic. She had 5 children and only one of them survived. Her husband, Percy Shelley, died in a boating accident also. Her life is just crazy. And there's some speculation that her and Percy Shelley and her stepsister were all engaged in a polyamorous relationship, which the movie kind of hints at, but doesn't really go into. It kind of glosses over all that stuff. But Mary Shelley and her husband, Percy, were very non-conventional, and they had a alternative lifestyle. And so that makes her an interesting character. And that's another thing. Most writers and most creatives are pretty eccentric people. They do kind of crazy things. They're not normal people. So if you're a creative person and you're kind of the black sheep in your family, don't feel bad because most of them are. And a lot of them have routines that are kind of like OCD or bordering on OCD kind of things. So if you're that kind of person, don't feel bad about it. The other thing I wanted to mention too is if you don't know, Lucifer has been renewed for a 2 seasons. It's been renewed for season 5 and season 6, which I really like. Which, if you don't know, I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman, and I recommend American Gods, the novel. I haven't seen the show, but the novel is great, and I'll be talking about that on the episode of Nero and the Pig with Mo. And yes, by the way, there's a whole story about the pig name, which Mo will have to get into and explain to you. I might have him on the show and interview him because he's a really interesting fellow. He's one of my friends from England, and he's just a really gentle, nice guy. And yes, he's a diabolist. Can you believe it? And he actually is friends with Nero, and everybody thinks I'm so fanatical. And yet, if you meet Mo, you'll be like, how is Mo friends with Nero? Because Mo is so calm and so gentle-spirited. You'd think that he wouldn't be friends with somebody as fanatical as me, but he is. So anyway, I look forward to that. But that's it for today on this episode. I hope you found some of it interesting. I hope I went into a little bit of detail. But if there's anything you would like me to talk about, if there's any types of books you want me to talk about, or you'd like me to give my opinions on, or TV shows you'd like to hear my opinions on, I'll be glad to review them when I have time and give you my thoughts. I'm always interested in recommendations for TV shows, books, and just generally good entertainment stuff. I'm a big fan of fantasy, obviously. My favorite authors are obviously George Martin, Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Jonathan Mayberry, the author of the Joe Ledger series of military fiction. And obviously my favorite nonfiction book is Machiavelli's The Prince, if you believe that. All right, well, I'll see you next time, guys. Take care. May Satan be with you. And I hope you found this show entertaining. Let me know what you think. If you want to see the Friday casual episodes continue, and if you have any recommendations for the show, and maybe I can actually get some authors on here that write horror to come on and talk about their books. Although I've heard that even though they write horror, that a lot of them have a very anti-diabolist, very anti-Satanism point of view, and they refuse to come on the shows, even though they write stuff about the devil, which I find really interesting, that you can make money off the devil, but you don't want to have anything to do with a show dedicated to people who worship him. That just makes them hypocrites as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, that's it. Talk to you later. Take care, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Dark Illumination Report podcast. news headlines, show information, and more, go to rjwomack.com. That's RJWOMACK.